Have you ever wanted to understand why a partnership works or why a relationship between two people can be fraught with conflict when one of those people seems to be able to get along with anybody? Well, astrology can help us dig into this question. And with Kamala Harris naming Tim Walz as her partner, as her vice presidential candidate partner for the 2024 election, we have this ability to look at that partnership, but only if we can rectify Tim Walz's chart. And as far as I can tell, his birth time is not out there. And so this is one of my favorite things to do as an astrologer. And I'm just going to say that I'm putting it out there that I think his birth time is around 7:30, possibly a few minutes earlier, but would love for others to take a look at this, give some feedback, and let's try to figure this out. But so much can happen once we have that. But let's take a look first at if this is the right time, about right. I can tell you what I see as consistent with what his consistent patterns of behavior are and how they sync up with this chart that comes from a 7:30 p.m. birth time. Let's take a look. So my sources for information about Tim came from looking at a whole bunch of different articles. I looked at Politico's 55 Facts. I looked at The Hill. I looked at Forbes. I looked at the New York Times. I looked at some comments from, oh goodness, I can't remember. Who's that guy in Florida? That's embarrassing. Okay, anyway, these are my sources, just trying to find as many facts as possible. And again, as I've mentioned, the key thing is to look for consistent behaviors and consistent patterns, because this is what astrology tells us about, is our natural patterns of behaving. So a number of things stood out to me. One of the first things that did was that he seems to be noticed late. He's a recent social media darling. He was a dark horse candidate, kind of late to the game in terms of being a potential vice presidential pick. Just that he came into politics so late is also indicative of being noticed late or having a late reputation. And that's the midheaven. And so the first thing I said was, okay, let's give him a late midheaven. So somewhere in the 20s. Another thing that stood out is that he grew up in a small town and is very comfortable with that because of that situation. And Saturn is what creates restriction. And he has Saturn in Pisces, meaning a limitation or a discernment about who he will feel around him. And as a child, it's not a tool that we can exercise on our own, but it is exercised upon us. And so having Saturn in his fourth house, his safe havens down here, would be consistent with that. In addition, he uses that discernment to create safe spaces. That is using the energy in the opposite direction, his being able to use it as a tool. And he has used it to create, I think, safe spaces for the first gay-straight alliance at his high school, probably in controlling the lunchroom at the high school where he worked, and probably may contribute to his ability to be a good teacher, to focus it down and really be able to pay attention to someone when they are talking to him or know who needs his attention. So there's another thing. Another part that seems to be consistent with Tim is his ability to keep groups organized. He gets tapped into leadership positions where he has that ability to use this Pluto and Uranus set of tools in Virgo to keep things neat, to keep things together, to keep things from getting chaotic, and to have those tools in the 11th house where he is hanging out with groups would be consistent with that. Again, creating a functioning atmosphere in a lunchroom, rising to a high rank with the National Guard, being deployed to humanitarian situations where groups need to be organized, also being elected chair of the Democratic Governors Association. All of that would be consistent with having these two tools here in the 11th house. As well, he has Mars and the Sun in the 6th house. I like to think of this as being energetic day to day. And he is described as being energetic. So this would be consistent with that. He seems to just do it matter-of-factly. It's not necessarily fun, but that would be consistent with being energetic and being described as that. Notice that Jupiter at this 7:30 p.m. birth time is not in the 6th house. It is in the 7th house. And it seems as though a lot of the growth that happens is through relationship. The person that became his lieutenant governor at Minnesota is someone who trained him to become successful in politics. Again, growth through relationship. Growth onto the national stage through his connection with Kamala as her vice presidential pick. And my guess is there are other situations that I'm not aware of that would be consistent with that. And so that is related to the natal chart. Now, one of the things I also think is very helpful and what I use as a tool for helping people I work with to understand how they experience life is taking every single one of these tools and putting them in order from 0 to 29 degrees. And I ignore the signs when it comes to looking at this, because this is the way in which we experience life, where the early degrees tend to be our cocktail party energy, our surface energy. And as we progress into the teens, tends to be more of our day-to-day energy. And finally, those things we wait forever for are those tools in the 20s. And one key thing with getting the right birth time is knowing where that moon is going to show up. And one of the things that seems to be consistent with Tim is that when something happens that hits his heart, he acts immediately. You'll see the word shortly thereafter often that he will do something. And that is why I would put his moon immediately after Mars, which is consistent with this 7:30 p.m. time. The other things that you can look at are related to his ascendant. So when he tends to step away from the crowd, that is how I like to think about the ascendant, is stepping away to do something, and he steps away to be in connection. A good thing for a coach, so possibly consistent. And also a late degree would also be consistent with being a good coach. So being able to hang in there for quite a long time before he needs to step away. Whereas an earlier ascendant might make him a little more aloof when it comes to being with groups. And as I've mentioned, this late midheaven, I think it is possible that it is just before Jupiter, but for now, just to have a nice round number like 7:30 p.m., I've put it here. So these are my thoughts. I'm going to go with this and use this to take a look at his relationship with Kamala and what they have together in partnership. Let me know what you think. give me any additional facts that might help me pick a better time. But this is something I enjoy, and it is meant to bring about discussion. So let me know.